Hey y'all, welcome to the channel. I'm Task Force Bourbon. We're going to do our second video of the night. Hope you guys are enjoying the channel. But what we're going to be doing tonight is Blanton's Flight Fight. And what we're going to be doing is something kind of cool here, something I've been wanting to do for a while. What we have is Blanton's. Love it or hate it, right? It gets both of those things in the bourbon community. But what is definitely cool here is that we're going to be able to see, we got regular Blanton's, a 93 proof bourbon. Okay, this is from mash bill number 2 from Buffalo Trace. It's 12 to 15% high rye, right, for them. It's not a high rye in the bourbon community, right? You're going to see that high rye moniker adorned to things that are maybe closer to 20 or plus percent. But what we got is Blanton's, okay, that's the regular stuff. And then you got Blanton's Takara Red. And then on my right, you have Blanton's Gold, right? The only difference is between these is you go this way to Takara Red, okay? You have 2 years older, all right? Let's go back to Blanton's. The only difference between this and Gold is it's 10 proof higher. So what we're going to be able to do today is we're going to be able to see what happens when you take a mash bill bourbon, aged the same, done the same, and Blanton's is a perfect prime example, right? Because although they're single barrels, and single barrels mean that they're picked by the master distiller and they could vary wildly from one another, they are all aged in a tin-clad warehouse, right? And it's very small in the sense, comparison to other distillers maybe, but in the sense that they're controlled brand-wise for flavor profile. Okay, so you take one Blanton's, taste another Blanton's, taste another Blanton's. They're generally in the same wheelhouse with one another, okay? So what's cool here is you're going to really truly be able to tell the difference between a medium and bourbon. What happens when you age it 2 years longer? What happens when it's 10 proof higher? Which is better, okay? So a little bit of background is my thing to give you all before we do the best part of the night is taste them, is give you a little bit of that history. So Albert Bacon Blanton, super cool middle name by the way, right? Was born into a bourbon family and started working at a distillery adjacent to his family home at a young age. He would work to become a pioneer in the bourbon industry and eventually became the president of the distillery, which was then known as the Old Fire Copper Distillery, OFC. Colonel Blanton kept the distillery running through Prohibition by producing medicinal whiskey, and he remained at the distillery through its different variations for 31 years until he retired in 1952. Following Colonel Blanton's death in 1959, the master distiller at the OFC distillery, which was then known as the George T. Stagg Distillery, as we now know is known as the Buffalo Trace Distillery, Elmer T. Lee decided to honor Colonel Blanton's legacy by producing the first commercially sold single barrel bourbon. That's their claim to fame. That's Blanton's claim to fame, is they're the first quote-unquote single barrel bourbon. Okay, Elmer personally selected barrels of whiskey from Warehouse H, the metal-clad building where Colonel Blanton once aged his finest private stock bourbon, and released the first Blanton single barrel bourbon in 1984. Okay, Blanton's has a weird place in Buffalo Trace's lineup. Since Ancient Age, not Buffalo Trace, owns that mash bill number 2. Ancient Age is not a U.S.-based company, and there are a few Blanton variants that are only released abroad. So you have the green label, the black label, those are really essentially the same thing in the sense that they're Blanton's aged at 80 proof. All right, that's not something I personally seek out, but you do you. One such variant is Blanton's Takara Red, as we see here before us. All right, it looks very similar. What you're going to notice there is some Japanese, letters on the label. Let's go to that side here. All right. And then the fact, obviously, that you should know what you're purchasing is Takara Red. Let me flip that around so it's visible. All right. Now, while the word Takara in Japanese means treasure, all right, that's cool, but it's probably named after Takara Shuzo, or Shuzu. If I'm messing it up, I apologize, and I don't mean to offend anybody. Right, which owns all of Age International brands, so it's likely that their name is more likely attributed to them. Takara is supposedly aged 8 years old, right? Like this is probably aged 6 years old, although officially all Blanton's is a non-age dated NAS bourbon. Okay. Now Buffalo Trace says, quote, the bourbon was first developed by Elmer T. Lee in '84 as a high-end expansion in a time when bottom shelf bourbon sales were struggling. Named after former distillery president Colonel Albert Bacon Blanton, Elmer recalled how Colonel Blanton would handpick, quote, honey barrels from the center cut of warehouse age for the many parties Blanton held, said the distillery in a press release. Many years later, the distillery called upon Elmer to create a new bourbon in 1984, and Blanton's was the world's first single barrel bourbon. So Elmer, that's why we can get into Elmer T. Lee, maybe a little bit later here, but he has a bourbon named after him as well from Buffalo Trace, but which is again a single barrel, and again from mash bill number 2, right? But he in fact actually took all of his energy. He went out and he sold that single barrel, so he really put Blanton's on the map. Okay, now so there's a little bit of rub when it comes to warehouse H, and so Buffalo Trace loves to say warehouse H is amazing and awesome, all that good stuff. But really, it was commissioned for construction by Blanton at the end of Prohibition with the intent to make a metal warehouse to age whiskey faster. Right, that's not something we love to hear, right, in the bourbon community, but that's the truth of it. All right, so that was obviously at a time when sudden demand, all right, the end of Prohibition, required more bourbon to be put on the streets. So as a result, that warehouse tends to get warmer in the summer days than others. Like other warehouses, Buffalo Trace Warehouse H is also steam heated during the winter, further aiding the aging process. So in the Blanton's lineup, I already talked about, these three. You got green, you got black. You also have straight from the barrel, which is my personal favorite of the lineup because it's Blanton's, but straight from the barrel. So 120 plus, 128, whatever that proof ends up being, depending on that specific bottling. That's my personal favorite. It's the unofficial 6th edition in the BTAC or Buffalo Trace Antique Collection lineup. That's something I would personally love to see added to the BTAC line. It's one of my favorites in unofficial or otherwise lineup there. I'm a Blanton's fan. Again, love me, hate me, or whatever have you. I think Blanton's is a perfectly fine beverage to sip on, as long as you're doing it neat, of course. So Chris Comstock, Senior Marketing Director, says, quote, "We've seen Blanton soar in popularity over the last few years, and fans have asked us for the gold version in the U.S. because up until now, gold has only been available internationally, namely in Europe and Japan. And so what we're seeing now is very recently, I think is as of summer 2020, we're seeing Blanton's Gold come to the U.S. market. So that might take a little bit of time to trickle to us, but I've heard of it as recently as a month or so ago, being somewhat readily available in the U.S. market. Now Blanton's is actually not that expensive. It's about $54 to $60 depending on where you're getting it from, but you'll see it very commonly on the secondary market go from $120 to $200, with that middle ground sort of being around $150. That's, I think, part of the reason why Blanton's gets a lot of the hate that it does. That combined with its packaging, claiming it to be the best bourbon in the world, whatever. Again, I think it's a fantastic bourbon. I don't necessarily think it's the best bourbon in the world, but it's something that we love to see. Big T Bourbon, thanks for joining. I'll have to do a quick shout out to them because Big T Bourbon is not a master distiller, but a fellow bourbon steward over at Virtue Feed and Grain in Alexandria, Virginia. And you'll notice here I have a single barrel store select, Blanton's that he gave me at one point, and it was fantastic. So thanks, Big T Bourbon. Good to see you joining on. We'll start off with the classic bourbon, Blanton's, and we'll see what we get from it, where it racks and stacks, and then go left and right. So as no surprise, I'm maybe not the best bourbon steward in the world, but I'm getting a lot of those classic bourbon vanillas and caramels again, right? Buffalo Trace writ large, I seem to be able to pick out of a lineup because we see that those classic cinnamons and vanillas come out of all of their mash bills. Something I personally love. They're very approachable bourbon, especially at 93 proof. Big T Bourbon says, "You are very welcome, my friend. I agree with your words this evening." All right, thanks. And cheers. So, no surprise there. Those open nose notes that I got there carry directly into the open. You're getting a lot of those vanillas. You're getting a lot of cinnamon, I think, on there. Of course, this is truly a single barrel, so this could vary in your experience, right? Not only because your palate, and I've heard you know, something as wildly as 200 some odd flavors up to 2,000 some odd flavors is on, you know, an individual's palate. It's like a fingerprint, if you will. But for me, I'm getting a lot of those vanillas and cinnamons on the open. Let me get to the finish here. So the mid, not overly complex. You do get a lot of more of those vanillas and cinnamons. But the finish, you're starting to get something a tad more richer. No surprise, right? It's almost, I'm laughing before I even say it. You get a little bit of the oak, right? Of course, you're going to get oak on bourbon because that's where it's aged. You get 80% of what happens as far as flavor and everything else comes from that barrel. So it starts out as a white distillate, right? A clear distillate. Once you put it in those barrels, 80% of, you know, the color, the flavor, the aroma, all that stuff that happens that we love about bourbon comes from those barrels, right? So it's no surprise when you get oak on a bourbon. A very simple bourbon. And if it's blasphemy, forgive me, but I think this is very well balanced, very approachable. Again, I'm a fan of Blantons. I think there's that vanillas, those, you know, cinnamons, a touch of caramel, something rich, something oaky on the end. But it's not overly complex. It's nothing I'm writing home to mom about. It's not something I'm definitely not paying $150 to $200 for, right? $50-$60, yeah, for sure. You know, and you know what I definitely don't find here either, which is kind of maybe a bit odd, is for being their high rye mash bill, I don't get a lot of rye. Okay, so what we're going to do is move on to gold. So again, this is 10 proof higher Blantons. That's the only difference. So, and 10 proof higher isn't truly a large jump. All right, in the bourbon community, especially those who've been drinking bourbon more than a day or two, we get into drinking bourbons that are up towards what we call nickname hazmat, 140 proof, and that's the area a lot of us love. So when we talk, you know, 103 proof, that's not going to scare any of us away by a long shot, and it's not going to necessarily carry over into a heavy, you know, proof heavy nose. But however, big comma here, this is better. A lot better, I think, than the Blantons. And I think that's because that 10 proof. You're starting to get some of those complex flavors that I was missing. You almost get like a bit of a fruit. It's like you're getting a red apple, like a really dark red apple. You still get those caramels, but it's not like a, you know, caramel covered apple or something like that, right? But you get the vanilla and the caramel in the open, the cinnamon, yep. But then you get this, and the cinnamon carries all the way through, and the vanilla carries all the way through. The caramel dips off in the mid, and the mid starts that red apple, that really thick red apple. And then in the end, that oak becomes a super well balanced. So here was a bit like, it's there, it's, you know, it's whatever, it's a, you know, 6-year bourbon, whatever, it's. And then here you're like, this oak is actually really well done here. And I like it. It's not toasted, it's not, you know, you don't get aged flavors on it or anything like that. But, yeah, so far I'm going to go regular Blantons, or gold, and then the regular here. And then the Takara Red. So let's go back. We got Blantons again, right? The regular 93 proof 6-year aged bourbon. Then we got the same. Now this is still 93 proof, but this time we're going to go 2 years higher. So Big T Bourbon also says sometimes you will even get butter depending on the barrel. Well, we love butter. I love a creamy profile when it comes to bourbon. Big T Bourbon's the man. He knows he's done a single barrel select. That's a, you know, a dream of mine to do one day. You know, getting the sample, something like, you know, Buffalo Trace, anything really from the barrel would be fantastic. But yeah, you definitely get some creamy notes. The Takara Red I have cheated because, you know, as you see, this has been cracked you didn't see me crack it live, that's because I have had some before. So I think I do know that there's going to be a major flavor difference here, and we'll see what that is. So yeah, you can tell what I can tell here. Let's not concentrate on the flavors. What you get here is you can tell there's a little bit more depth, not like a proof depth, but you get like some kind of depth. It's almost like thicker on the nose, if that makes sense. Now, wow. Okay, let's just do this now. All right, this is, yeah, like this. So this, I would not be able to pick out a lineup is Blanton's. This does not taste like Blanton's. I think because I've tasted these back to back, I can still get those vanillas and cinnamons. But this tastes like almost like a wine would taste, like a port finished bourbon would taste in a way. It's got those grape flavors. It's dark fruits. The oak flavor you get is like a charred. It's like charred on the front, and then the oak continues into like just a regular oak. So it goes charred, and then quickly drops off to a regular oak. But it's more like drinking this tastes like a port finished bourbon. Like, I think I would want to see, and this doesn't even make sense to do, but I would want to see this compared up against like a Thomas S. More port finish or something, which is owned by Barton 79-2, which is parent entity Sazerac, which is the same parent entity who owns Buffalo Trace, which controls Mash Bill No. 2 and Blanton's. Long story. But this has got some rich, real dark, fruity flavors, but it loses that caramelly, light stuff that you get on like the regular Blanton's, that cinnamon, that vanilla. Yeah, this is a fantastic bourbon. So, like I said, it does open a bit oaky. You get some of that wet aged oak, maybe a little bit, because you can tell that you can definitely tell it's aged 2 years longer. But you're greeted full force, like I said, that red grapes and that wine. You get that vanilla, but there's a subtle honey. And you know what I'm actually remembering is I think I remember saying a cinnamon butter. So Big T Bourbon, there you are. I think I get a little bit of cinnamon butter on this one. This is more well balanced than the rest, and I think again that you get some dark fruit notes to linger with some dry, maybe a slight tobacco, but really heavy on those dark grapes, and almost like a mixed grapes kind of deal going on. And you know what, Blanton's, love it or hate it again, they do a fantastic job. Buffalo Trace, honestly, as a whole, does a fantastic marketing job. But you got to think about what they're doing here. They're marketing this to Japan, all right? And much like you saw back in the 60s, 70s, where people wanted to break away from their parents' drink, and they got into light spirits. Now we're seeing that resurgence come back into darker spirits, but bourbons, scotches, whiskeys, as a whole. That same thing is true for Japan, but in a different way. And so what maybe they're doing here is trying to appeal to their palate, and they may have accomplished that by way of aging it 2 years longer, or maybe it's just a happy anomaly, and I'm just enjoying a 2 year older Blanton's. I don't know, but either way, I gotta say, I think out of this lineup, I like Blanton's aged 2 years longer. However, major comma here, because I like Blanton's, and this is not a Blanton's, right? Obviously, it is a Blanton's. There's a freaking horse topper, which, oh, by the way, for those of you who don't know much about Blanton's, if you collect all Blantons, 8 of them, yes, public math, and you turn them in, there's 2 different ends. You turn them into Buffalo Trace, they'll send them back to you in a wood stave, with a little plaque adorned to it, and it's something you can collect and cherish for the rest of your life, right? But this is a Blanton's, but it does not taste like the rest of Blanton's. And because I like Blanton's as a product, I like Blanton's regular. I like Blanton's Gold better than Blanton's, right, regular. So I'm going to say I like Blanton's Gold if I want to drink Blanton's. However, if I have to choose between the rest of the Blanton's, I think I'm going to go Takara Red. But I think as a whole, I can see that, you know, from your regular and you're going 2 years to 10-year proof, the proof will keep with that mash bill flavor, at least as it pertains to this specific mash bill, right? It keeps with the same specific flavor profile, but the age drastically changes it in a much different way. This increases the way those flavors stand out to you, you know, and come forward. But then the age truly does actually affect the flavor and can almost change a brand completely, because this doesn't taste like a Blanton to me. So that's probably why, again, if I racked and stacked, you know, I don't know if you guys can see back there, that's Blanton straight from the barrel. I'm going to go, you know, straight from the barrel Gold Blantons, right? I want Blantons for whatever occasion. I'm going to go straight from the barrel Gold Blantons, right? But if I think I got to choose, you know, I'm going to have to choose the Takara Red. However, you know, I want to see what this does, again, straight from the barrel, you know, as far as, you know, which one's actually a better bourbon. But it's you know, apples and oranges. So let's go ahead and see if we can't rate these, you know, three, you know, all together and finish these guys off here and end this video. That's a Big T Bourbon. You nailed it with the cinnamon butter. That is a very special spot to be with the right bottle. Yeah, I mean, who doesn't love cinnamon butter? In fact, when I say cinnamon butter, what came to mind, you know, being from the South, you know, I'm from, you know, I think of Texas Roadhouse, those cinnamon butter rolls you get. Yeah, who doesn't love that? Texas Roadhouse cinnamon butter rolls, fantastic. Let's try that again, actually. Yeah, like a port-finished bourbon that has cinnamon butter flavors. Fantastic. Big T Bourbon. I think the next thing for you guys here is to do a Takara Red. Ask them to do 2 years age longer or whatever else magic they're doing behind the scene and do a store pick. And then put me in that VIP line to get me a bottle here. All right, so let's go back real quick and just make sure we're correct and finish these guys off. But we'll start with Blanton's, the OG. A very approachable spirit. And I really hate to see that this is such a harder thing for people to come by, because I used to be able to say Eagle Rare and Blanton's are something every major you know, startup bourbon guy or gal should try to pursue, because these are fantastic entries into the bourbon, you know, rabbit hole. You know what? Yeah, Gold's definitely better. It's got more rich flavor notes, but we're going to do here. Check this out. Big T Bourbon. I cannot confirm or deny. That's in the pipeline at Virtue, but stay tuned. You will be one of the first to know. I'm glad you guys heard it first here. You know, Big T Bourbon, again, over at Virtue Feed and Grain in Alexandria, Virginia. Fantastic restaurant and bar. You check it out. Those guys are doing great things there, especially with Big T Bourbon, you know, in their, you know, on their roster. So we'll be on the lookout for what they got to offer, and I will be in the first line and let you guys know, you know what happens. But what we're gonna do, we're gonna do some wizardry. We're gonna see what happens if you mix three, because I've tried all three. Why not? You know, let's just see what happens. There's a Gold, and there's 2 year, and we got regular Blantons in the middle. We're going to mix it. You know, why not? Let's have fun. Bourbon is meant to be shared. It's meant to be drank. So stop saving on your shelf. I don't care how fancy, how much money you pay for it. Drink it. Tell me how great it is. Share it with me if you can. And drink it. But let's go ahead and have some fun here and see what happens when you mix all three together. Well, you get a heavier nose. You get some of those grapes. You lose that vanilla and cinnamon. You get maybe a bit of that caramel still there. But let's go ahead and try the first sip. I mainly taste Takara Red. I don't know if that's because the percentage were off, but I get a lot of that port finish, kind of, grape stuff going on. I get a touch of oak. This tastes like Takara Red mainly. I think the age overpowered the rest, despite the fact that whatever percentage were in there, these two obviously, probably outpowered that in terms of percentages, wise. But the Takara Red is standing out in terms of flavor. So that Takara, that age, it makes a major difference. So Ginger Nunes says, look at that, a bourbon steward and chemist. Well, chemistry requires way too much math for me, and I am too drunk to taste that chicken. So I will drink the bourbon and tell you how it tastes, if that's okay. There's a very fantastic wet aged oak there on the end. Not like something you'd see on a Pappy 20 or 23 or something like that, like a very old, or Elijah Craig 23 or whatever have you. But there is an older bourbon there. Obviously, we're only talking 8 years old at max. And again, this is non-age dated. All of these are non-age dated, so this is only speculation, right? But this is, you definitely get a little bit of an older kind of oak going on. So it makes sense why you're not getting aged oak, because even on like a Knob Creek 12, I only get a touch of it. It's a nice mix of like a caramel and a grape. Very sweet. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and finish this video off and rate all three of them together as a perfect rating, because why not? We're having fun. We like Blantons. Let's give them back some love, guys. But I'm going to go ahead and share this with a buddy of mine who decided to remain anonymous off screen. So we'll go ahead and finish this off. I'm going to share the rest with him. Thanks for joining, guys. Great bourbon, Blantons, love it or hate it. Thanks for joining.